dad, in Salinas, they only had school to the 3rd grade. So when he was finished with the 3rd grade, he went to work at Iverson's blacksmith shop, and his father was also a blacksmith. And so they both worked for Iverson Brothers for a while, and then they moved, after when the grandparents moved down south with them, they went along too. And when they were down there, tragedy struck, and that they had, my grandfather and grandmother had 2 daughters, and then my grandmother's sister, Aunt Ellie, I don't know if they were visiting down there or if they were living down there, but anyway, these 2 little girls were out on the hillside playing, and they were burning logs, clearing the land down there. And a log got away, and it rolled over the little girls. They were only like 3 and 4, I think, and it killed them.
Those were your aunts?
Huh?
Those were your aunts?
Were they what?
Your aunts' children?
They were my dad's aunt's children. One was his sister. And then he had another sister, and she and my dad, and I don't know who else in the family, had diphtheria. And they were pretty young. And the little girl died of the diphtheria, and my father very nearly did. All the rest of his life he was bothered with lung trouble and stuff that was caused by that. What else? They lived down there till around 1906, I think they left. No, 1906 for the earthquake. A year or 2 before that. And there was a need for a blacksmith at Santa Rosa. So he and his father and the grandmother had a job in Salinas, working for the 2 old bachelors, the Grimes brothers. And so she didn't want to go up there, so she stayed and lived there at the Grimes and took care of these 2 old bachelor men and house kept and cooked, and she used to make the gardens and all that stuff. And the earthquake came along, and it just destroyed the blacksmith shop. So the Southern Pacific was putting the railroad through from Oakland, San Francisco, Oakland, to Seattle, and my father, they were advertising for steel workers, so my father went and applied for a job, and he got a job as a steel worker on the railroad. And his father came back down to Salinas and went to work for Iverson Brothers, where my grandmother, Emma, was the cook. And my dad went on up through Oregon and Washington to Seattle, building the Western Pacific, and he immediately became the foreman on the railroad. Well, when they had to tunnel through the sisters, and so sometimes they were 2 and 3 and 4 years going not very far when they had to do all this blasting and digging, and they had to do it all by hand. There was no heavy equipment like there is today. And he got so he got to Myrtle Creek in Central Oregon, and they stayed there for 2 or 3 years working through the mountains. And when he was there, he met my mother, who was a school teacher in the area, and so they went together for a couple of years, and then they were getting ready to move the railroad crew on, and so my mother, of course, was going along, and they hired her to be the cook for the crew. So they went on, and they got, that was in 1911, and they got to Seattle. I don't know, it was before I was born anyway. So they got there 1912 or 14 maybe, because I was born in 15. And they wanted my dad to go on with the railroad through Montana and take it east, and he didn't want to do that. He said it was just too cold, and the weather was too bad, and they had to work no matter how the weather was. And so when he was in Seattle, he heard about a job on a wheat farm, and horses. They raised horses and wheat in eastern Washington, and they moved over. Moved over there, and he farmed there for a number of years, and then he came. And then he moved. There was no schools. In the meantime, my mother in the meantime, my father had quit the farm, managing this farm, and had opened up a blacksmith shop in town, and we moved over to Glenwood. And I had been born there in 1915, and Margaret in 1917, and then they moved out in the country further, and there were no schools, and I was ready to go to school. And he had he did a lot of business for the government in his black shop. The government kept all the Indians' horses shod, and my dad had medicines and stuff that he bought through Watkins products. I think that was the one. And the horses would get distemper and different things, or get a sore foot, and Indians would bring them down there, and he'd take care of them. Well, that was okay, but there was no school, so they had to board me out, and I hated every minute of it. I guess according to reports, all I did was cry. So I wanted my family, and then I was unhappy because I'd been already held back years. So they so then they moved to across the mountains over to Castle Rock. We lived there for a number of years, and he worked as a steel worker on the paper mill that was going in, and on the paper mill, and there's something else. In the he worked on the high school and the paper mill, and then he also worked on the Monticello Hotel, which was being built. He worked on something else there with the paper mill, and I've forgotten what it was.